Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive. Today we're looking at something I think we can all relate to: movies.
Yeah, movies.
And you know what I think is so cool about this is that we have this incredible data set that you've brought to us, and it's an analysis of IMDb ratings. And we're going to be looking specifically at how men and women's top picks differ.
Right.
Now, we're not talking about whether one is better than the other.
No.
It's not about like men are right or women are right. It's about how those preferences might actually reflect deeper cultural patterns and even how Hollywood targets us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And how we kind of respond to those cues.
Totally. So let's just dive right into this data because it is fascinating.
Data on the screen, numbers come alive. Male, female flows where the patterns thrive. Visual charts, public outlets unify. Gender decoded, bringing truth to light. Watch them all drum fill. We break it down, real talk. Trends unveiling, facts from every block. Here's your insight, watch the data glide. Gender decoded, let the beats collide.
We're going to uncover some seriously fascinating patterns and maybe even come up with some possible explanations for why these differences exist.
It's going to be fun to speculate a bit.
Right. So the article breaks it down into two lists. The women's list, which features movies ranked way higher by women, and the men's list, where, well, the guys are carrying those ratings.
I'm ready to see what we've got. Let's do it.
Okay, so the women's list. Prepare yourselves because the top 3 spots are all about magic, coming of age, and a little bit of romance.
Okay, lay it on me.
In first place, with a pretty substantial difference in ratings between genders, we have Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix. Then, hot on its tail is Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. And rounding out the top 3, a classic, Pride and Prejudice.
Okay, so we are definitely seeing a trend here. I mean, 2 Harry Potter films right at the top. That's a pretty strong indicator of what resonates with women viewers.
It really is.
We're talking fantasy, young adult adaptations, and of course, who can resist a good dose of romance? Pride and Prejudice definitely checks that box.
Absolutely. And it's not just those 3 films. The article points out that a whopping 17 out of the 20 films on the women's list were released after 2000.
17? Wow, that's a huge majority.
It makes you wonder if there's something about these more contemporary films that's connecting with female audiences in a different way.
It's possible. It could be the storytelling styles, the themes they explore, or maybe even how female characters are portrayed. You know, there's a lot to unpack there. But one thing that definitely stands out looking at this list is the number of films that feature strong female leads.
Oh, yeah, that's a great point. You've got Wonder Woman, Frozen, and Hidden Figures, just to name a few. These are films where women are front and center, breaking barriers and taking charge of their own destinies.
Right. And I think that representation is really important.
Absolutely. I mean, it's one thing to enjoy a movie, but it's another to see yourself reflected in the characters and stories on screen.
Right. It's like, wow, I can be like that too. You know, it can be really inspiring.
Yeah, I totally agree. And those films on the women's list, they really offer that sense of empowerment and representation.
They do. They show women as complex characters driving their own narratives and not just playing the typical, damsel in distress or love interest.
It's a refreshing change, that's for sure. Okay, so we've explored the world of witches and wizards and revisited a beloved literary classic, but now it's time to journey into a completely different cinematic landscape. The men's list.
Ooh, this is where things get really interesting.
Get ready for some intense, action-packed, and thought-provoking films, because the top 3 on this list are, well, let's just say they're a far cry from Harry Potter and Pride and Prejudice.
Hit me with it.
At the top, with a significant lead in terms of rating difference, we have For a Few Dollars More.
A classic spaghetti western. Nice.
Next up, a war film that's considered a masterpiece by many, Paths of Glory.
I see we're diving into some serious cinema here.
And rounding out the top 3, a film that takes us into the depths of a German U-boat during World War II, Das Boot.
Wow, talk about a shift in tone.
Right, from whimsical fantasy to gritty war epics and westerns. It's almost like stepping into a different era.
It really is. And, it's not just those top 3 films. The article highlights that a whopping 17 out of the 20 films on the men's list were released before the year 2000.
17. Wow. That's even more than on the women's list.
It is. It seems like there's a real affinity for classic cinema among male viewers. We're talking films that often delve into themes of, grit, intensity, and psychological complexity.
It makes me wonder if there's a bit of a nostalgia factor at play here.
Oh, for sure. I think these films, they evoke a sense of the past, a time when storytelling felt maybe a little more raw, a bit unfiltered.
Right, and you've got films like Casino, which explores the dark side of the gambling world.
Yeah.
And Rashomon, which really makes you question the nature of truth and perception.
Yeah, definitely. Those are films that, they challenge you, they stay with you long after the credits roll.
And let's not forget the classic tough guy narratives that we see on this list. You've got Rocky, the ultimate underdog story. Raging Bull, a brutal look at self-destruction and redemption.
Oh, yeah, and Platoon, which is such a raw and powerful depiction of war.
These films tap into these, really intense themes of masculinity, resilience, facing adversity. Themes that have resonated with, I think, male audiences for decades.
Absolutely. And it's interesting how those themes, they even extend to the 2 Indian films on the list. You've got Tari Zameen Par, which is about...
Tari Zameen Par.
It's about a young boy with dyslexia who overcomes challenges. And then there's Dangal, which is about a father's determination to train his daughters to be wrestlers in a patriarchal society.
Those are both really great films, and it is fascinating to see how they fit in with these themes of, pushing boundaries and achieving greatness.
It really is. Just looking at these 2 lists side by side, you almost feel like you're peering into 2 separate worlds. On one hand, you've got stories of magic, romance, emotional journeys. And then on the other hand, you have tales of survival, grit, confronting the darker aspects of human nature.
It's wild, right? I mean, it really makes you wonder what's driving these really distinct preferences.
Yeah.
And what I find really fascinating is that the article also digs deeper into some of the more intriguing details from these lists.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
So, remember how Harry Potter dominated the women's list? Well, get this. There are actually 5 Harry Potter films in the top 20.
5! Wow, that's impressive. It's like a whole generation grew up with those stories and characters.
And I think a huge part of the appeal, especially for women, comes down to the strong female characters. I mean, Hermione Granger is brilliant. She's resourceful. She's constantly defying expectations and proving that, intelligence and bravery are just as powerful as any magical spell.
Absolutely. And then you've got Luna Lovegood, with her unique perspective and unwavering loyalty. These are not your typical damsels in distress.
Exactly. And it's not just the characters, right? The Harry Potter series explores all these universal themes of, coming of age, finding your place, navigating friendships and relationships.
Right. And that resonates with people regardless of gender.
It does. And then it's hard not to notice the difference in how romance is represented on these 2 lists.
Oh, yeah. Good point.
The women's list is full of romance, and on the men's list, it's almost completely absent. It makes you wonder, is this just, an inherent difference in taste, or are we seeing the impact of societal expectations?
That's a tough one. I mean, on the one hand, you could argue that women are just naturally more drawn to love stories. But on the other hand, you can't ignore how, for so long, romance has been labeled as a feminine genre.
It's true. And it probably discourages some men from, openly embracing those types of stories.
Yeah. And, it's like those old marketing cliches where action movies were for boys and romantic comedies were for girls. Thankfully, I think we're moving away from those rigid categories.
We are. But you're right. Their influence is still felt.
It is. And speaking of genre biases, it's interesting to see how animation and musicals show up on the women's list. Like you've got Frozen, Tangled, Beauty and the Beast.
Even The Sound of Music made it onto the list.
Right. But on the men's list, these genres are pretty much non-existent.
Yeah, it's almost as if those genres have been unfairly, lumped into this category of chick flicks or kid stuff. And it kind of, I don't know, maybe prevents some viewers, especially guys, from giving them a fair shot.
I think you're right. It's a shame because those films often have some amazing storytelling. They can be visually stunning, and they can take you on such a powerful emotional journey.
Right. And Frozen, it's not just a princess movie. It's a story about the bond between sisters. It challenges expectations. It's about embracing who you are. I mean, that film connected with people worldwide. Like, you can't deny that.
Yeah, for sure. And, let's not forget about the impact of culture, right? Like those Indian films, Dangal and Tare Zameen Par, they were super popular with men, especially in India. And it makes you think about those cultural preferences. Maybe in some cultures, motivational stories or sports narratives just resonate differently.
That's a good point. And it just reminds us that cinematic tastes, they're not just shaped by gender. You've got cultural background, societal norms, all of that plays a role.
Absolutely. And, that's what makes these conversations so interesting. We start to see how cinema connects with people on a global scale. There's so many different perspectives.
For sure. Okay, so we've unpacked these lists, we've analyzed the data, and now I think it's time to tackle the big question. Why? Why do these gender disparities exist in the first place? What's driving these differences in how men and women rate movies?
Well, when we look at the data and all the points we've discussed so far, a few possible explanations really start to emerge. And one of the biggest ones is the influence of cultural and societal norms. I mean, for decades, certain genres were just marketed to specific genders, like war films, action movies, westerns. Those were often seen as, masculine entertainment. And then romantic comedies, musicals, family-friendly movies, those were considered more for women.
Yeah, it's like those old movie posters where the guy is always holding a gun and the woman is, off to the side looking kind of helpless. It's almost funny to look back at those now. But those images really did reflect those societal expectations about what men and women should be watching.
They did. And while we've definitely come a long way in challenging those gender roles, I think that their impact on our viewing habits can still linger, like a sort of subconscious bias. You know what I mean?
Like we've been conditioned to see certain genres as more appropriate for one gender over the other.
Yeah.
Even though, the lines are definitely blurring these days.
Exactly. And speaking of blurred lines, another factor to think about is the role of nostalgia and generational gaps. Like, remember how the men's list was all about those older classics?
Yeah, and the women's list favored the newer releases. It was such a contrast.
It was. And I think it might reflect, a generational difference in how we watch and appreciate films. Like maybe older viewers, particularly men, have a stronger attachment to the movies they grew up with.
Oh, absolutely. It's like revisiting a favorite book from your childhood or listening to a song that takes you back. Those movies become more than just entertainment, They're almost like cultural artifacts with personal meaning.
Yeah, that makes sense. And at the same time, maybe younger viewers are more into those contemporary films that reflect their own experiences, their own issues, and their worldview.
Yeah, so it's not just gender, right? It's the era you grew up in.
Yeah.
The films that shaped your cinematic landscape.
Exactly. And, we can't forget about the importance of representation. We touched on this earlier, but it's something that deserves to be emphasized. Viewers, no matter their gender, they just connect more deeply with stories that they can relate to and with characters that they feel represent them in some way.
It's true. When you see someone on screen who reminds you of yourself or, who shares your struggles or your dreams, it just makes the story so much more powerful.
I completely agree. And that's why I think the presence of those strong female leads on the women's list, it's so important. It gives women a sense of empowerment, a sense of, I can do that too.
Absolutely. And finally, I think it's important to remember that marketing plays a role too. Think about those massive campaigns behind, like the Harry Potter films or the Twilight movies. They were everywhere. I mean, you couldn't escape it.
Yeah, true. Those films were just heavily promoted, and those messages, they definitely reached a massive audience.
It's kind of a snowball effect, right?
Right.
Like the more a film is promoted, the more people see it, the more popular it becomes, and then it just keeps growing.
Right. And those older classics, they might be brilliant, but they don't have that same level of, mainstream exposure.
So really, a film's popularity and reach, it's a combination of things. It's marketing, it's distribution, cultural trends, word of mouth. It's not always just about the quality of the film itself.
Exactly. This whole deep dive just highlights that our moody preferences are shaped by so many different things. It's our personal taste. It's our cultural background, our generational experiences, even the way movies are marketed to us.
And I think that's a great takeaway. There's no one-size-fits-all approach to, enjoying cinema.
Yeah.
What resonates with you might not resonate with someone else, and that's okay.
It is. The beauty of film is that it's so diverse. It can connect with people in so many different ways.
It's true. So to all our listeners out there, the next time you're, browsing IMDb or having a movie night debate, remember this deep dive. Think about all those fascinating factors that might be shaping your choices and the choices of the people around you.
Yeah. And here's something to think about. Are these gender differences in movie tastes driven by, nature or nurture? Are we born with certain preferences, or do we develop them over time because of our experiences and influences? It's a complex question.
It really is.
Yeah.
And it just makes you realize that, even something as personal as our taste in movies is actually influenced by so many things.
Yeah. And the world of cinema is just constantly changing. It's always evolving.
It is. Well, that about wraps up our deep dive into the fascinating world of IMDb gender disparities. We hope you enjoyed it.
We did. Thanks for joining us.
And until next time, happy viewing, everyone.